Góðan daginn og velkomin. Good morning and welcome everyone to this discussion on sustainable tourism, insights from Canada and Iceland. I would like to introduce our Minister of Culture and Business Affairs, Lilja Alfreðsdóttir, former Minister of Education, Science and Culture, and former Minister of Foreign Affairs and External Trade. This idea for this event came up during our travels with the minister in Vancouver last year when we visited Alison McKay and her colleagues at Destination British Columbia. And here we are just over a year later, executing that idea. Minister, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Hlynur, and thank you also for organizing this seminar on tourism in Canada and Iceland. And I also want to thank you in British Columbia for a very warm welcome when I visited you a little bit more than a year ago. First of all, I would like to say that Iceland and Canada, we have so much in common. One of the things is definitely the unspoiled nature and the open wilderness. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this conference is that we are sharing experience and the upcoming challenges that we have. One of the things that has been happening here in Iceland is that we've gone from a country that has had, like in 2010, about 500,000 visitors, foreign visitors. In 2018, this number was about 2.2 million. So the tourism in Iceland has grown very rapidly in a relatively short time. And this is about 35 to 40% increase in the total number of visitors. We are expecting about 2.4 million next year, according to the forecasts of our tourist office. And we've also seen in Iceland the economic importance of tourism has grown quite substantially. It is now accounts for about almost 8% of GDP and covers about 35%, 30 to 35% of our export revenues. And you can just imagine the change in our economy when you have such a big inflow, both of new visitors that we want to put on extra, we want to do it really well. Iceland is a country that has a high GDP per capita, and we want the service level to be high. One of the things I would like to say is also, one of the main factors for our visitors to come to Iceland and visit us is the nature. And one of the things that we have to focus on is that everything that we do is sustainable and takes care of that. Nature continues to be valued and observed, but still it's a sustainability that is a key word. What I'm working right now on as a minister is tourism policy until the year 2030, and we also have like a strategic action plan that follows this policy. I expect that I will take this through the parliament early next year, but this is a joint task of both the industry, municipalities, different actors that have been investing in tourism in Iceland. And since it's a rather new sector and a growing sector, we need to take care that there is a certain balance between Icelanders, the locals, and also the amount of tourists that we welcome to Iceland. For your information, Iceland has always been a flight hub. Back in the days in the 60s. Early 60s, a lot of planes. They would, come from the US and Europe, and then there would be a transfer of passengers. But most of them didn't really stop in Iceland. And one of the key things was just to, make them interested in the country. We have established a great interest in the country, but now we need to take kind of a more sustainable steps in making certain that we take care of this new sector and in harmony with the Icelanders. So having this conference with Canada and key people in the industry organized by the consulate is so very much important for us. We have also key players in Iceland participating, and so I wish that we can exchange views and we can learn from what Canada is doing in this industry, and we highly appreciate all good sustainable solutions for tourism in Iceland. So thank you all for listening, and good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Minister Alfreðsdóttir, and for joining us today. I would like to introduce Addison McKay from the destination BC, and also that just to mention that the event is organized by the Embassy of Canada in Reykjavik, the Embassy of Iceland in Ottawa, in partnership with Polar Knowledge Canada and the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network in Akureyri. So over to you, Alison.
Thank you, Ambassador, for correcting me. I appreciate it.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. I offer a good afternoon and a good morning to everyone. It's with gratitude that I'm joining you today from the shared territories of the Musqueam Indian Band, the Squamish Nation, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, which commonly is known as Vancouver, British Columbia, and it's located on the west coast of Canada. Here at Destination BC, we respectfully acknowledge that we carry out our work on the territories of Indigenous peoples throughout British Columbia, and we honor our ongoing and developing relationships with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And we are on a pathway of learning and are committed to working together as British Columbia works to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. I'd like to say thank you very much to both the Ambassador and the Minister for your wonderful opening words, and to the Minister for helping to set the context of our discussion today. I'd like to share just a few thoughts of my own before we dive into the panel discussion. I know we have 4 wonderful panelists that are here to join us. So tourism, a powerful driving force, driving economies and livelihoods, and has been the bedrock of prosperity for many nations, bringing happiness and hope to people as they explore the world. Today, however, we do stand at a crucial juncture. The resurgence of travel post-pandemic and the potential harm to the environment and even our fabric of our communities, if not well managed, really demands a pause for reflection and a call for innovative thinking. Sustainable and travel and regenerative tourism emerges as beacons of hope, showcasing how our journeys can actively transform the way that we experience the world. Sustainable tourism challenges us to minimize any potential negative impact and become catalysts for positive change. And regenerative tourism urges us to deepen our connection with nature, fostering a sense of responsibility that contributes not only to the resilience of the destinations that we explore, but also the regeneration of the places and the spaces that we love. Travelers, especially younger generations, are increasingly more conscious of the potential environmental and social impact that their journeys may have on the destinations that they visit. A shift in thinking and how people are choosing their destinations is really starting to grab hold. We have mindful travelers choosing sustainability and purpose. And as travelers embark on those purposeful journeys, they become allies in the transformation towards a sustainable lifestyle and carrying that mindset beyond their travels and back into their daily lives. And despite the challenges we face, there are many reasons for optimism. There's destination management organizations, governments, decision makers, academics, business owners, so many that are stepping up, scaling up, and accelerating the development of sustainability strategies. They're taking action, they're building partnerships, they're making investments in green infrastructure. So as I mentioned, we're privileged to share the next 40 minutes with a panel of thought leaders and decision makers who are committed to this work and have already started to make significant strides and tangible actions to really reimagine the future of travel. So with that, I think let's delve into this discussion, and I welcome Arnar Grayson, Einar, and Toby. So with that, let us begin. And also for all of our participants in the room today, if you have any questions or comments, again, it's really meant to be a two-way discussion, a sharing of learnings, perspectives, as Minister highlighted. So please do join in the conversation and utilize the chat. And we will strive to try and address some of the audience questions that we have throughout our discussion. Great. So we know that protecting our natural environment is critical. So I'd really love to hear from the panel about what challenges that you've faced and how you've leveraged community and partner relationships to overcome that. So if we could start with Arnar, I know that you've had a significant tourism increase, visitation increase in the past decade. There's obviously been some significant challenges that you've overcome. So from the perspective of the Icelandic Tourism Board, I'm curious to know what you've been doing to really help push things in the right direction.
Thank you, Ali. I hope you can hear me. I assume you can hear me. I would first of all like to thank you for the opportunity to talk here today about this important topic. Indeed, it's true that we've experienced here in Iceland a very fast-paced development in tourism since 2010, as the minister highlighted here in the opening words. And this fast-paced development definitely does create challenges. Our nature here in the north is fragile, and with this tourist flow coming to the country, it does create, as I say, sustainable challenges. Seasonality is definitely one of the most sort of traditionally issues that we've been having in these terms. And that is a sort of a common goal of all actors in tourism in Iceland, aiming for a better distribution of travelers, both in time and space. We have had great success in that, especially if we look at the country as a whole. I think we've, amongst the Nordic countries, had the best distribution of travelers throughout the year, Finland set aside. However, one issue that we are still dealing with is better distribution of travelers in the winter time to the countryside. So the success is very limited to the southwestern corner of Iceland. Another challenge I might add is the soil erosion on popular tourist sites. The fast-paced development has created issues there. And our main tool there is the so-called Tourist Site Protection Fund. And that is a fund that we have established for individuals, companies, municipalities, layman organizations, everybody but state actors, where we sort of annually $5 to $7 million are allocated for the funding of projects. In terms of partnerships, Business Iceland, the tourism cluster, regional marketing offices, we work closely with these entities in terms of sustainability. And lastly, I would like to add that the provision of data is something that the Icelandic Tourism Board does work a lot on. So the provision of information to encourage informed decision-making regarding sustainability issues.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing some of your challenges and what you've done to overcome them. Building on that, Grayson, I know obviously partner relationships are really core to Destination Canada's work. And you and I have talked about in the past the importance of social license. So just wondering if you had any thoughts on this to add.
Thank you, Ali, and thank you, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. This is very cool to be in this forum. What I would say is that destination development, that the function of that to Destination Canada is a relatively new one. But the thing that we really wanted to focus was the importance of communities' agency in the tourism that was impacting their regions. So we've put a real concerted effort into that concept of social license to operate. Like, do we have permission? And I say that with a level of gravitas. Do we have permission to be doing this kind of work if the community has not agreed to that? Or have they been fully engaged, and do they own what the tourism is happening? So I think that has been one of the things that we've done over the last couple of years. The other thing I would say is we are very fortunate to have very strong partnerships across the country. Similar to Destination British Columbia, we have partners across the country, representatives from each of the provinces and the territories. And likewise, we have it from quite a few of the municipalities as well. And they have strong relations within their own region. So we very much work in alignment and in complement with those partners. I would also say that we have a strong partnership with Parks Canada and with Trans-Canada Trails, who, Parks Canada is one of our biggest owners of assets that tourism people come to visit. And so we wanted to make sure that we were working in alignment. Their primary mandate has, over the past, historically been about conservation, but they're very interested in how tourists interact with nature in the most kindest way and the most caring way possible. And we're trying to work with them to ensure that, there are these overloved destinations, and how do we ensure that they're carefully managed, both in terms of geographic dispersion and also seasonal dispersion. And the reason the seasonal dispersion is not, it's absolutely about the environment, but it's also about labor, offering a calm and solid employment to the locals, which then gives them the space to continue to care for their environment. So we've tried to see and weave it across our relationships, the work that we do, but also with the partners and in the work that they do, that we're always in complement and we're serving the community. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Grace. And you mentioned something you just brought up that kind of really leads well into the next question that I have for the panel about, visitors interacting with nature. So just building on this a little bit and talking about investment, I wanted to ask, how can we invest in eco-friendly visitor infrastructure without compromising our natural landscapes? And perhaps if there's been any innovative approaches that our panelists have used or seen. Toby, I know the National Capital Commission has 3 very specific roles. And so I was just curious to know from your perspective, what approaches you've been taking in terms of the investments in those visitor amenities.
Sure, happy to tackle that one. Allison, thank you for the question, and good day, everybody. Yeah, I think what I would say in response to the question about infrastructure is, in some ways, we have to redefine what infrastructure is. It doesn't necessarily mean building lots of large concrete-based things, and we need to have a sort of a wider sense of what infrastructure means. And maybe I can give you 2 examples of that, of projects that the NCC has been involved in the last couple of years. The first is a project that happened within Gatineau Park, which, for those who don't know, the nation's capital is a large federal park. It's about 360 square kilometers, which is pretty big, and has both a conservation and a recreation mandate. And we have a system of asphalted parkways, so on which vehicles have historically been permitted to drive at almost all times, about 34 kilometers worth. And when COVID hit, we realized we had an opportunity and, in fact, a responsibility to provide more outdoor space for people to do recreation and to look after their physical and mental health. And so we shut the parkways to private vehicles and opened them up for active use. And although we did that in response to COVID, the reaction was so positive and the numbers so overwhelming that that became a program that we piloted even after COVID ended. And now we're in a situation where these parkways, 34 kilometers of asphalt, which the cyclists love, the hikers love, the roller skiers love, are now open almost exclusively to active use. And we've supplemented that with having shuttles, so to make sure that people who suffer from accessibility challenges or elderly people who aren't able to bike or walk up what are fairly steep inclines at certain times, the shuttle program complements that and ensures accessibility. And that's an example of where we've taken existing infrastructure and transformed it into something that is sustainable in 2 ways. One is, of course, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions that comes from the vehicle tailpipes who were otherwise using that infrastructure. And secondly, from a tourism point of view, really opening up a recreation avenue that has been hugely attractive. And we've seen the fact that these parkways are open for active use advertised in cycling magazines from across the country and other tourist periodicals. So that's been a very successful project and an example of how transforming infrastructure really works. And then secondly, I'll very briefly mention another project, which is this past year, we opened up a renovated river house, which had been on the shores of the Ottawa River for over 100 years. But we added essentially swim docks and a supervised swimming area. And that became a hugely attractive destination for people who were who were keen to be able to use this amazing water in the nation's capital, but in a more organized and a more supervised fashion. And the fact that we didn't have a lot of parking around there meant that the only way for people to get there really was for people to walk or cycle or take public transit. So, Alison, those are maybe two examples of how infrastructure can be transformed and rehabilitated very much with sustainability and tourism in mind.
Yeah, no, thank you, Toby. That's fantastic examples. Like you say, not only new, but investing in the existing and really with that mindset of the visitor flow or the management and having that flow occur dispersed throughout some of those very natural and sensitive sites. Einar, I know from what I've learned is I haven't had the chance yet to visit the beautiful Iceland, but I understand that no single place better represents the history of Iceland and the Icelandic nation better than the Thingvellir National Park. I understand it's both a protected national shrine and a natural wonder of the world. So I'm sure you have much to add to this discussion as well, if I could turn it over to you.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for this introduction. Thank you very much for inviting me to this forum. I'm very happy to be here. On this note, I can actually echo what Arnar was saying a little bit and Lily as well, the minister, about the fast pace of tourism in Iceland. It has actually been on a super speed in the last 10, 12 years, which has actually affected a lot on how we approach infrastructure. And one could almost argue that in the last 8 years, we've been doing a lot of band-aid infrastructure, meaning that we are, basically band-aiding, many sites, up until the 2016-18 or so, when the big infrastructure fund came about. And band-aid is that, what I mean is that you have a site that just sees suddenly an overload of tourists. So that's, it just in general has been one of the big challenges for infrastructure design in Iceland in general is what flow, what kind of tourism masses are you designing for? And one can say that we have gradually evolved from somewhat ad hoc band-aid design in the last 8 years over to approaching sites more in a holistic way. And this is also to do with the nice fund of the infrastructure fund that was set up in 2016-17, where they put forth very strict conditions for the sites. They need to have some holistic view on site, how you approach design and etc. And one can also say that in the recent time, and then this is when I'm speaking macro level in Iceland in general, before I get down to Thingvellir, that there has been a more and more emphasis on good design practices, both architecture or planning and landscape architecture in the design aspect in Iceland. So you can see that really evolving into more vernacular architecture, using local material and etc. And you can actually, but you're always somewhat, it's always thrown at you the huge amount of tourists that you have in many sites in Iceland. And that is the big challenge. How do you design for just a huge number of tourists and trying to be eco-friendly and trying to accommodate them? At Thingvellir National Park, we see the whole lot. We get almost every single tourist that visits Iceland. So we're used to a lot of crowds, and we've seen numbers peak this summer. And I can mention two examples of how we have approached design, or two or three. I can mention many, but we have since the early 2000. We have when we design, we used a lot of vernacular material, lava rock walls. We have used lava rock slabs for some of our walking paths. The simplest things work the best. Even though we have record crowds, we don't see people wander off trails because we basically simple lined them all off. It's the simple, it's KISS, keep it simple, just to just make sure that it's fairly simple that what we're doing. But what we are actually working on now is a new master plan that really will have, is approaching a new way of approaching the site. We need to address the flow of tourists and how the tourist operators also sell tours to Thingvellir. So that's kind of in a long run, a behavioral change that we need to do with the big chunk of the tourists that visit us. We are about to alter the flow of tourists through the site to protect the site better. And we have down to details. We've done a floating boardwalk with multimedia to have people experience the Parliament 1,000 years ago, where we had to navigate through archaeological remains. And then so we have on many different levels worked with design of this. Sometimes we've used maybe not the most local material, but we had to also always assess the cost and how do you deal with masses, and if the terrain is challenging, we need to really look into the cost of design and etc. So I think that's all for me now, at least. Thank you.
No, that's fantastic. And thank you. You've really brought up two, I think really, well, more than two, but certainly a couple really key points and thinking. And I know you're getting some fantastic support for your work in the chat, but the importance of understanding current behavior. Was the behavior that you're looking to strive for? How to change that behavior? And really, as you noted, like applying that design thinking in your processes. So and you kind of alluded to the holistic and balance. So just shifting a little bit, my next question is around focusing our sustainability efforts while at the same time dealing with the current economic realities. I think, Grayson, you touched on it a little bit: inflation, labor challenges, impacts from the evolving climate change can be a very difficult thing to balance. What approaches have you seen that could successfully balance and advance both of these? Krista, I did mention you. I was curious to know from the national level if you had any thoughts or perspectives on that.
Thank you, Ali. I would say one of the things that we have embarked on earlier this year, and we launched a thought leadership paper on a regenerative approach to tourism. And when I say regenerative, it's used broadly, but I would say is that it is truly a balance between social, cultural, economic, and environmental. And if they're not really in balance, it's not really serving the community. So we've made sure that the economic point of view is just as important. It cannot come at the cost of the other three. They all need to move in tandem. Another fundamental component of a regenerative approach to tourism, as I mentioned in your earlier question, response to earlier, is the social license to operate, that communities actually care. So when they talk about infrastructure or investment or labor, it is actually responding to that particular community need, not some standard thing across. We can bring some solid principles on how this can work, and we have offered them broadly to our partners across the country, and we've seen a huge uptake in that regenerative approach. They're applying it as appropriately to their region, and I think that has been a huge help. And I think it is the same language we use with our partners. I mean, the national partners, that is like Trans-Canada Trails and parks, and new partnerships that we're leading into. We see that it's the same language that we're all beginning to use, that if we're not doing right by the community and by their environment, like people, place, and culture, if we're not truly working in, and not necessarily preservation, but we're in alignment and instead with that community, we're in it for the short haul. We're not in it for the long haul. And if we want to be a sustainable sector, which is respected, and one of the colleagues on this forum said is that, Ali, actually it was you who said that we are attracting customers and visitors who want this of us. So if we are not doing it, what are we truly showcasing? I would say another program that Destination Canada launched earlier this year is the Tourism Corridor Strategy Program, where we're working with partners, and I would say like Alberta and BC, on how do we showcase the Rockies in a much more thoughtful way, where we've engaged community broadly. The work within the regions were already happening and they've engaged the indigenous communities. We've just made sure that we've complemented that work and we're catalyzing that work so we can bring those experiences sooner to fruition. Does that help, Ali?
No, that's fantastic. And I wrote down one of your statements, people, place, and culture. And I've been hearing this theme emerge through our discussion, you and I, and at the national level in Canada, but also through our discussion this morning. So thank you for that, Grayson. Arnar, as Minister mentioned in her opening remarks, that there's a lot of commonalities between Canada and Iceland. So yeah, just love to hear your thoughts too on this question in terms of that balance between sustainability efforts, while at the same time, the shorter term economic realities, and if you had anything to add.
Yeah, thanks. This is actually a great question. And the economic reality of tourism has been, let's say, extremely visible. And when it sort of bangs in the way it does last year and this year, after the COVID period, when no one was here. And then, it happened so fast. And we are basically up to the numbers now, and only 1 year after just over 1 year after the COVID ended, to the same numbers we had in 2018, close to 2.2 million tourists. So the economic reality is striking, and at the same time, sustainability efforts needs to be taken into account. So I would like to mention or approach this question both addressing the sort of the national level and also the local level. On the national level, what the approach that I think that we are doing here that is successful, and I have really high hopes for it, is what our minister was mentioning here in her opening remarks, is the action plan that we are laying out right now. We are now currently about, close to 100 specialists in tourism and tourism-related issues working on topics related to tourism. We have 7 specialist groups, each one composed of, let's say, 9 to 10 specialists addressing all these issues that we mentioned here: inflation, labor challenges, climate change impacts, and so forth. So I'm extremely hopeful for that action plan when it's being ready. We are now in the second part of the work, and I think the actions that will be laid out will have a great impact on these challenges. Also, secondly, on the local level, here at the Icelandic Tourist Board, we have had great partnership and work with the destination management plans. And Iceland is divided into 7 regions from that standpoint. This is some sort of a grassroots approach where people from all levels can participate, and how, when, where, and tourism should be developed in the regions, the locals know best. So to address these issues you mentioned, inflation, labor challenges, and so forth, we look at partnership with the local areas as key. I hope this answered your question.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I know hopefully it'll be made public when the Iceland Action Plan comes out. I'm really keen to see. It certainly sounds like it's shaping up to be a really targeted action plan. And I appreciate, thank you so much for highlighting those different levels, both from that national level, and I know Grayson, you spoke to this as well, but also that the grassroots, as you mentioned, and coming up from the local and the destination management plans. That's very similar, I know, for those joining from British Columbia and other parts in Canada. I think that's a really similar approach that we see in our areas as well. So just wanted to transition a little maybe to Erna and Toby in terms of managing specific sites. Just was curious to know in terms of what strategies that you adopt to really prioritize that sustainable longer term gains over those shorter term economic benefits. And Einar, sorry, my apologies. You and I have talked about your management approach, and you'd mentioned it, you're updating your management plans, and I think it takes like a 20-year horizon. So I was just curious to know if you could speak a little bit more on how to balance that longer term view with those shorter term benefits or challenges.
Yeah, here I am. Yeah, this is, as you said, we have just revived our management plan. Unfortunately, it's not in English on our website already, but I will make sure it's going to be in English at some point on our website. But we took a very long horizon, and it's maybe we need to update it. It's built into it to have a 5-year renewal of it, or kind of recap on it. But the management plan is very much focused basically on the day-to-day management of the site and how we want to foresee it. But I think the strategy is to somewhat prioritize and work with sustainable tourism in general. For example, here in Iceland, they need to address somewhat the number of tourists and how they are dispersed over Iceland. That is, as I see on the comment here, one of the comments is speaking about Canada being vast and huge, and it's different from Iceland being so small. And I can truly be, that's very true. But here in Iceland, we are dealing with a lot of tourists in many of our sites, and I think in order to make sure that these sites are governed and managed in a sustainable way into the future, there needs to be some kind of approach to somewhat help, spread out the number of tourists. And in some places, we are somewhat maybe reaching the how many tourists do we want in some places, because you basically can't fit more in some places. So I think there is somewhat a governmental approach to somewhat which will probably, I agree with Arnar that this approach on the action plan that is being made now, I'm actually in one of the working groups there. I think there will be some good come out of that, especially in terms of longer term strategy, because we are dealing with, you can sometimes sense here in Iceland that, social sustainability amongst the locals in some areas in Iceland is kind of just being met, so I think there needs to be some kind of a very strong understanding also of the, what tourism does for our economy, that people kind of see the whole picture, that, the tourism is bringing in economic growth in Iceland, but there needs to be this balance, up against the sensitive sides, and how many people can we have at, different, tourist sites. And it's very well summed up in one of the comments, or many of the comments that we heard during COVID, when there was absolutely no one out here. Then many Icelanders revisited when they were allowed, and they said, yes, now we can visit the sites, and we can visit the waterfalls, and we can visit many of our sites with, without looking over the cross of hundreds of tourists. So I think this is part of an issue locally here in Iceland we need to address somehow, to make a, not that there's a very big, disagreement with tourism and what it does, but there is, how do you flatten out the curve? How do you, make sure the sites are, people enjoy the sites, and both locals and the tourists. So I think I think that when I look 10 years into the future, because we are seeing the numbers and the prognosis for the next 10 years, we might have 1.5 million visitors going through by my visitor center right here this year, but we might be looking at 2.5 million or 3 million in 10 years time. Yeah. And this is a big kind of something we are trying to address. So a holistic approach to planning and design is a strategy also to try to approach the sustainability of tourism. Yeah. So yeah. I don't know if I'm going out on a limb here or where I'm heading with my talk. So I hope you made something out of it.
No, yeah. That's wonderful. And I just, as you noted, and I think, I recognize that the pandemic and COVID and the stoppage of travel has had devastating and lasting impacts on a lot of tourism industry and businesses and others. But I know yet you spoke, and so did Toby earlier, of some lessons that we've had to adapt as a result of those travel restrictions even, or opportunities that we had, and bringing them into the future and into the way that we learn and apply it in the next 10 years. So I appreciate both you and Toby sort of touching on that in your responses. And mentioning your name, Toby, I did want to turn over to you. I see some parallels with National Capital Commission. I understand as well you take a longer 10 or more view to your planning, both the master plan, as you mentioned, of Gatineau Park. Also, I understand there's a revised sustainable development strategy. So just curious to know, any of your perspectives on this.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. But maybe first I'll just respond to Einar's point. I think he's raising a really, really critical question about as managers of public sites, when we become victims of our own success. And I experienced Einar's observation myself in Iceland. I was there a year and a half ago, and I did the famous Laugavegur, which for those who don't know, is probably the most famous multi-day hike in Iceland, in Thorsmark National Park. And what Einar talked about, I really experienced. I actually, as much as I loved the experience and the geography was extraordinary, I actually felt a little bit guilty because I was backcountry camping, but there are no controls over the number of people who were there. And I wasn't sure if I was putting my tent on some sensitive ecosystem, or Einar spoke earlier about soil erosion. And so, I mean, I fully appreciate that for Iceland, the idea of needing to control numbers and maybe initiate a permit system. I mean, that's something I feel that our colleagues at Parks Canada do very well in terms of permitting backcountry access. I mean, I think that's going to have to be more and more a reality for all kinds of sustainable tourism. And I'm sure our Icelandic colleagues are starting to look at that, because it's hard to imagine the Laugavegur with more people, and certainly in the high season. So I have a lot of sympathy for what Einar is saying. We are experiencing that to a much lesser extent, but where we really are trying to control access through things like encouraging sustainable access. So in our case, I already talked about the Gatineau Park parkways, initiating paid parking in our parking lots while offering free shuttle services is another way that we can start to control access, and again, sort of the ways in which people are accessing our sites. I think building out infrastructure, a number of my panel colleagues have talked about the 4-season approach of trying to flatten the tourism waves, and we are doing that here in the nation's capital by working with partners on developing a much larger cross-country ski network on our pathways, which are used for cycling and walking in the summer. But working with them, we've doubled the number of cross-country ski trails we have on those pathways over the last few years. So it's really thinking about that notion of, well, what do we do with these surges? So flattening, really trying to encourage sustainable access to these sites. That's important. And lastly, Alison, you mentioned sustainable development strategy we have. Yeah, we take very seriously the idea as a public organization of being real leaders on issues around that. So of course, anything we build now is going to be zero carbon. We initiated a ban on small handheld power tools. So now they are all electric. We are the first jurisdiction in Canada to ban gas or diesel powered handheld power tools, as I mentioned. And yeah, really looking towards opportunities to demonstrate sustainability leadership in all of its facets. So there's just a few examples.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for adding, and as you mentioned, you know, highlighting that the differences and the different approaches and your own personal experiences during your travels to Iceland. My last question before we turn a little bit to the audience, and I see you had a reminder that if you do have any questions, there's been some great commentary that's come in. Please do post them in the chat. My last question is a little bit of an area, I think, where we do have a difference between Canada and Iceland. In British Columbia and in Canada, really since time immemorial, Indigenous peoples have had an intricate, respectful, spiritually and physically dependent and really protective tie to the land. I know from some of my learnings recently that many nations place what's the seventh generation principle in their governance. And it's the philosophy that decisions they make today should result in a sustainable world 7 generations into the future. So just before we open up to audience questions, I was maybe to my Canadian panelists, Grayson and Toby, if you had any perspective or through your work, any learnings about maybe how we can weave some Indigenous values and approaches into the way that we work and how we either collectively or in collaboration are helping to manage the destinations and certainly the visitation flows.
Do you want me to go first, or Toby, do you want to go? Okay. I love the 7th generation idea. So just so you know, before I arrived in tourism 2 years ago, I worked at the city of Vancouver, and we were doing a 30-year community planning or city development plan, and our Indigenous colleagues said about the 7th generation plan that you really should be thinking about it from that perspective. And then we had our engineer stop and just say the most interesting thing. He says, yeah, I know you guys do 30 years, but bridges are built over 200 years. And so there was already this thinking about we should be thinking about long-term and connectivity. How do we connect people and all of those aspects of it? And in that, how do we weave Indigenous practices in the work that we do? What I would say is that we're at Destination Canada very fortunate to have a very strong relationship with ITAC, which is the Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada. We've had a partnership with them since 2015, and we've renewed it more recently in 2022. What I would also say is that we're very lucky that our partners that we work with, which is the provincial and territorial tourism associations, have very strong ties with their own Indigenous tourism associations, like Destination British Columbia and the Indigenous Tourism Association of British Columbia. Like, they are also extremely tight. So I think we are on the journey where so much work needs to be done. We are so much in our infancy. Certain provinces have done it far better and much mature compared to some. Destination Canada is on our journey on how we can get that done. I would say one of the things that we've been really weaved into our work is we have something called the Wealth and Wellbeing Index. It's how we show the performance of our sector. And it doesn't mean Destination Canada. I mean, how is Canada contributing to the wealth and well-being of all Canadians through tourism? And we have woven the impact and how to inform and influence and vice versa in the Indigenous community. And that is about preservation of land, preservation of culture, preservation of anything that we can do to be in an act of music, cuisine, art, culture, that both Canadians and our travelers can enjoy, and Indigenous communities who have agency over their tourism can showcase what they choose to showcase. And we are in the world that as they choose for us to promote them, we will be allies in their promotion. So I would say that we've worked very closely with ITAC on that. Just for Destination Canada itself, we finally hired a senior Indigenous relations manager to help our own competency on how we would do this work very thoughtfully with our partners. And that has been a huge source of guidance and learning and curiosity on how we can do it. So we don't just speak from theory, but how do we put this work into action? That's all I have to say for now.
Yeah, no, thank you, Grayson. I'll turn it over to you, Toby, if you have any.
Sure. Yeah, I can be very brief while saying that consultation and partnership with our Indigenous partners here in the nation's capital has been at the heart of our work at the NCC for a long time. So we are on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. And I'll just give 3 quick examples of the way in which we partner with them. The first is we have an Indigenous procurement policy. So because we're in the business of building a lot of things and cleaning up a lot of things, we do work closely with Indigenous-led businesses. So right now we're doing a big remediation project on one of our islands, and that work is being done by an Indigenous-led business, which is appropriate because it's an island that has important significance to the Algonquins. So that's one example. A second is we're in a process really of thinking through our naming policy. We have a public park, which used to be called a Nepean Point, named after a British aristocrat who actually never made it to the shores of the Ottawa River, and we've renamed that with an Indigenous lens in terms of actual naming, and work closely too on interpretation, which is important too. So that's been a very successful cooperative effort. And then a third example is we do a lot of archaeological work, and so we have partnered with our Algonquin partners as well in terms of helping to train Algonquin youth to do archaeological work. The artifacts are ultimately theirs, so we help manage and help steward that, but ultimately the ownership of these important artifacts are for the Algonquin Nation to ultimately own and eventually house. So that sort of idea of training up the next generation of archaeologists has been really fun and really stimulating. They really enjoy it, and we invite the public to come and watch the archaeological digs. So that's been fun too. So maybe I'll leave it there, Alison, knowing that we're running short of time.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that, Toby. I agree with, and I appreciate you and Grayson both raising some very important concepts and principles and approaches: Indigenous-led, Indigenous self-agency, self-determination, and truth and reconciliation. So looking at the time, I do see a question that has come in, and it is, what would you recommend to tourists themselves to be more sustainable, or what should be the key things we should take into consideration? I think that's a fantastic question to maybe wrap on. So maybe if we can go through the panelists, if you had one thing to recommend for tourists themselves to be more sustainable, or something that your key thing we should take into consideration, and I'll just go by my screen. So Arnar, over to you.
Yeah, so one key message, it's a hard one. I think given the reality of how things have been here in Iceland in terms of tourism in the past years, I would say the importance of the pace of development and sustainability. That is so important. I mean, in 2018 we had 2.3 million people coming here, 2.2 million, and we in brackets dealt with it. We have this year a little bit less, but we're having such a hard time. It just happened so fast, and not the social aspect is probably one of the most important ones, because the local people here, they do not all welcome travel as much as they did prior to COVID. So I would say pace of development and sustainability, very important. I don't know, maybe I don't want to take too much time here.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. I think that's a wonderful point. Einar, do you have rapid fire one thing? And then.
Now I wasted a few seconds on doing this. Well, I've been very fortunate in the past few years to work a lot with World Heritage, and I'm actually the chair of the World Heritage Network of the Nordic countries. And Þingvellir National Park is probably one of the key most visited sites of all World Heritage sites in the Nordic countries. And many of my peers, they often look towards us and see how can they get a little bit more tourism. And I always say, be careful what you wish for.
Well, that's a wonderful.
That's kind of like basically another way of saying what Arna was saying, that, tourism has two sides. It brings economic benefits, obviously, but in a fast-paced approach, you can never achieve, one of the three pillars of sustainability. If it's economical, environmental, or the social aspect. If you're just doing it fast-paced, you will just be, doing the economical benefits of it. So, absolutely what Arnar said is like, slow your pace and just, be in balance with your surroundings and what you're working on.
Thank you both. That is just a fantastic note to end on. I know we've heard it almost through every response: grace and people, place, culture, economics, that harmonious balance. I just want to say thank you to every one of our panelists today for joining us. I know your gift of time and your expertise is very much appreciated. I think that we've had a panel that's offered a lot of insight to all of our audience members. I know we've had some great conversation in the chat. I know this conversation will continue. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to continuing it with the panelists as well as all of you on the call today. To wrap, I'd like to pass it over to the Ambassador Jeanette Menzie of the Embassy of Canada in Reykjavik for some closing comments, and thank you again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can. Oh, wow. It tells me I'm muted. Okay. Thank you, Ali. I wanted to just quickly give Toby a moment because I don't think he gave his recommendation to tourists. So I'm just curious, Toby, as someone who uses those ski trails in Gatineau Park, what would be your little recommendation to those visiting?
Well, I think for people coming from abroad, and using my example of the Lagervegur, I would say really try and visit sites off peak. And again, that's been a theme we've heard. I think if I could go back, I would have done a different trail or come at a different time, because I said, as I noted, I felt this sense of guilt about being there in a really high peak time. And I think the second thing is I really like what Einar said about, just be thoughtful about your experience. And I think sustainable modes of travel, cycling, hiking, those have benefits both of being low carbon, but also giving you more of an opportunity to see the landscape, to meet with people. And I think they're generally, welcomed a lot more than, traveling the landscape, enclosed in your vehicle. So I think those opportunities to interact with locals are great too. So those are my two suggestions. Thanks.
Thank you, Toby. I wanted to just end by, I wanted to actually ask everyone in the chat, for those who are able to, just put in the chat where you're dialing in from, because I always find it fascinating, because these topics that we're discussing, I know they resonate much further than certainly our own backyards. So if you are able to, please feel free to just let us know where you're dialing in from. I also wanted to comment on the relevance of this topic as someone who worked in British Columbia for many summers to save up for university in many beautiful parts of British Columbia. And then of course, my home in Canada is close to Gatineau Park, and then my home right now is Iceland. I feel like this webinar has been really wonderful to tie all the various parts of my life together and all of the various outdoor pursuits that I like to participate in. I know a few of our speakers here, so it's been great to have you and to see you again. And for those that I haven't met, it's lovely to meet you. And Hlynur and I have been cooperating on these webinars for, it's probably close to 2 years now. Last year being the 75th anniversary of our diplomatic relations when we launched this webinar series, and we plan to continue it this year. Our next one will likely take place in the new year, and it will be focused on youth mobility, because in August of 2023, Canada and Iceland signed a youth mobility agreement, which will enable young people to spend upwards of a year, or I think they can extend to 2 years in the other country with a work visa, which is fabulous. And so maybe we can get some exchanges going on within the park system or in conservation and sustainable tourism. Ali, wonderful moderating on your part, and to my colleagues at the Embassy of Iceland for your incredible IT and logistical support. It's always appreciated. So thank you to everyone for being with us today, and we will look forward to seeing as many of you as we can at our next webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the day or evening. Bye now.
Thank you.
Tack för det. Gaman att